from the previous video, we know now what happens when we start using smart objects within Photoshop. But what if we bring in something from Illustrator into Photoshop? Some vector graphics. So in this video, we will learn how vector smart objects are created. Now, if you don't have Illustrator on the computer, don't worry about it. But for those who have Illustrator and who's also interested in learning how to work with vector files in Photoshop, this is a very useful technique. So you select something in Illustrator and then copy it by Edit, Copy, and then go back to Photoshop. And by the way, I'm using Command Tab on Mac or Alt Tab on PC to switch between the currently open applications. And once I'm back in Photoshop, I can go to Edit, Paste, which will come up with a dialog box in which I can choose 4 different options. But what I recommend to use most of the times is Smart Object. Once you select that and click OK, the logo will come in as a new Smart Object layer. Holding down Shift, dragging one of its corner points, we can make it bigger. Let's say we want to have it somewhere around this side of the image. So then I press Enter to accept the placement. Now you will see that this is a vector smart object layer, which just simply means that if I double click on its thumbnail, it will take us back to Illustrator. It's still embedded into our Photoshop file, but the source will open in Illustrator instead of in Photoshop. So there is a very nice integration between these two applications. And what's the point of opening the Vector Smart Objects source? Well, for example, if I want to make edits to the text in this case, I can do that here within Illustrator. So if I use the Type tool and I click on this text, using Alt left and right arrows, I can kern the text. So I can get the X and the E closer to each other, which I think works better. Then I can press Escape, and then once we save this within Illustrator, it will update in Photoshop. So if I zoom closer, undo, redo will show us what happened. So that was before, and this is after. So that's the whole point in using the two applications together, and the Vector Smart Object layer is the bridge between these two applications. The best thing about these special type of smart objects is that they are resolution independent, so no matter how big you make them, they will always look crisp and sharp around the edges. Just to prove that to you, if I zoom closer to this, you can see how nice and sharp it looks, and also my image with the balloon looks nice and sharp. But now let's select both of these together, and I am going to make them bigger. So using the Free Transform tool, I will zoom out as well, just so we can make it really big. So let's make them bigger, increase their size to something like that. And if we have a closer look at these now, when we zoom closer, you will see that our logo is still perfect and crisp around the edges, while this balloon starts to lose its quality. So it starts to get pixelated around the edges, and obviously it's much higher than its original size, the quality that the source of the smart object captured. So if I use Free Transform on this layer, I can see it's more than 2.5 times bigger than the source. So of course that will result in loss in quality. But the advantage with the Vector Smart Object is that it's always going to produce perfectly sharp edges, no matter what size you set it up to. So let me just go back to the original size and show you one last technique. What if I want to change the color of this text or the whole logo? There are a couple of ways of doing that. You can first of all go back into Illustrator and edit the source, or you can double click on the layer and use the color overlay style. That can be set up to any color and any intensity. So you can always reduce opacity as well if you want, and you can even use blend modes on the color overlay effect. But I'm quite happy with the white color, so I click OK. And if I zoom out, that looks quite good. But of course, we could put this also on her or on the side, or we can make it bigger and have it on top of everything else. So have it on the whole composition altogether, something like that. The whole point is that you won't be restricted by the size of this layer, thanks to the fact that it's a vector smart object. Now there's one last thing to consider. When you use smart objects, you are increasing your file size, because obviously it has to embed all those additional source files connected to the smart objects. So the more smart objects you use within a file, the bigger the file size gets. And generally, the slower your computer will open the file or export it, and of course it will take more space on the computer as well. So although I encourage everyone to use smart objects, in case you want to turn a smart object into a normal layer, you can do that by simply rasterizing that layer. So you can right click and choose rasterize layer. That way you lose the connection to the source file, and it will remember only the size, whatever your current size is of the layer. So it's not something you can recover later on. Once you rasterize it, that's it. There's no going back. Instead of rasterizing one by one, you can also use the filtering option. Remember, if you click on this icon here, it will show you all your smart objects. So if you want, you can even select all of them together, right click, and then choose rasterize layers. And we can just go back to see the normal layers, and we can tell that, yeah, the little smart object icon is gone from all of them, so they are now normal layers. In case you had your mask within the smart object, then even that is going to be rasterized. So you lose both the flexibility on size and also whatever you had within the smart object. Like we had the adjustment layer and the retouch layer for the elephant within its smart object. We had the connection to Illustrator file for the logo, and we had the masks saved within each of these smart objects as well. So now they are all gone. They are still separate layers, so I can still move them around, each of them, but they just lost that flexibility that we had before while they were still smart objects. There is another interesting feature called linked smart object, which I'm going to talk about in the next video.